Thank you. I'm Ben Tulo. I'm a professor in the Department of Earth, Energy, and Environment here at the University of Calgary, and we're very glad to have all of you here, in person and online, for tonight's EARTHx session. After the presentation, you'll have a chance to ask questions of tonight's speaker, and we'll display a number where our online guests can text in questions as well. This year's EARTHx series has been generously sponsored by the Gallagher family, and we are grateful to the Gallagher's ongoing support that enables us to bring guest speakers, amazing stories, and insightful topics to our stage. On behalf of all of us, thank you to the Gallaghers. Our topic tonight is Mars, the red planet. Mars has fascinated humans from every culture for thousands of years. With its distinctive red color and its visibility in both the northern and southern hemispheres, it has been a constant presence in our history, mythology, and science. As recently as 100 years ago, some scientists believe that other planets like Mars and Venus might actually have clement, Earth-like conditions, or even that they might be inhabited by extraterrestrials, aliens. We now know that just how inhospitable the other planets of the solar system are, and what immense challenges humans will face there. Personally, that gives me a profound appreciation for this planet we call home, Earth, and the space that we inhabit. So, to begin this evening's event in a good way, we live, work, and learn on the traditional territories of the people of the Treaty 7 region. They include the Blackfoot Confederacy, comprised of the Siksika, Piikani, and Kainai First Nations, as well as the Tsuut'ina First Nation and the Stoney Nakoda, including the Chiniki, Bearspaw, and Goodstoney First Nations. The city of Calgary is also home to the Métis Nation of Alberta, Districts 5 and 6. Now, here at UCalgary, we are proud to be home to the nation's largest Department of Earth, Energy, and Environment. Ooh. And our study of geology and geochemistry isn't just limited to Earth. For example, since 2022, I've been working with the Mars Science Laboratory Curiosity rover team to investigate past geochemical conditions on the surface of Mars, including the former presence of water and its potential implications for life. And that's why I'm so excited for tonight's talk from Dr. Ross Lockwood. When humans first landed on the moon in 1969, it was a groundbreaking moment. At this point, the critical mass of innovation and public interest makes it increasingly likely that we will reach Mars in the coming decades. Whether that's for a brief mission or a longer stay remains to be seen. Either way, living on Mars will pose some of the biggest technological and scientific challenges humans have ever experienced. How can we possibly prepare for something like this? How can we get a sense of what human life will be like under such conditions? That's where Ross's experience comes in. Ross is a scientist with a passion for learning, experimentation, and scientific outreach. He holds a PhD in Condensed Matter Physics, co-wrote an online course on black holes, and now works as a data scientist for KPMG Canada. In 2014, he volunteered to be a crew member for the Hawaii Space Exploration Analog and Simulation, or HI-SEAS project. This was a 4-month NASA-sponsored experiment on the slopes of Mauna Loa in Hawaii. So, as we think about what human life on the red planet might look like, we're honored to be joined by one of the few people who have come close to experiencing it. Please welcome Dr. Ross Lockwood for his talk, Real Life on Fake Mars.
Thank you for the introduction. All right, let me get set up here. And while we're waiting for everything to get lined up, I wanted to thank each and every one of you for coming out tonight. I know that to draw a crowd like this means that I've done something unique and interesting. And I need to recognize that this is really cool, and I'm very privileged to have been able to do it. And even more privileged to be invited 11 years after the fact to be able to share it with you and our online audience. So with that being said, let's get started. This is a picture of the HI-SEAS analog habitat built on the Mauna Loa volcano in Hawaii. And the reason we do this is that we love space. Even when you're crammed into a tiny Soyuz capsule like the one in the picture here, everyone loves the idea of exploring space and colonizing other planets and, making sure that humanity isn't just in one single breadbasket. And there's going to be some challenges with colonizing space. And the one that we're going to focus on during the discussion and the theme throughout was the focus of HI-SEAS Mission 2, which is that, maybe we could get that mouse out of the way, that mental health is a challenge that we're going to have to face when we get into the isolated and distant environments on Mars. And this is interesting. This is a headline that I just pulled. I can't remember what publication it was, but they actually cite here NASA saying that there have been no behavioral emergencies in US space flights yet. And somehow they seem to have forgotten the fact that on the Skylab 4 mission, the crew basically mutinied and turned their radio off. And you can, think of other examples, and maybe in more recent history, of things that went wrong. For example, the crew being, I won't use quotes on this one, but being stranded on the International Space Station for much longer than their intended span there. And even, from our own Canadian perspective, Chris Hadfield coming down and having his own challenges with the return to Earth and the health impacts that spending an entire year as commander of the space station had on him. So let's just go back a little bit. This is where it all began. I think at the earliest time I was able to express what my interests were. I said I would love to be an astronaut. And as far back as being 4 years old, I had my mom make this sweater for me that had a rocket on it with my name. But I grew up in British Columbia. I started as an apple picker, and I came to Alberta to start my Bachelor of Science in Physics. And it was during my undergraduate that I discovered basically a quantum mechanical effect in silicon quantum dots that became my PhD. So I ended up starting my doctorate in physics and volunteering for this high seas mission and being selected on the second round, so on the second mission. My favorite color is blue, and I thought 10 years ago, this is an old deck, that I might become an astronaut one day. Now the reality is that I'm a management consultant, and if you know what that means, you're laughing, and if you don't know what that means, I'll give you an optimistic definition. I'm a business firefighter. I get parachuted into companies that need a crack team, in particular, data science or cloud infrastructure is what I focus on. But my PhD is studying these colorful things called silicon quantum dots, and I've got an image here of some red strips of paper that are coated in the quantum dots. And this is probably the coolest thing that I ever did as a PhD student, but we got explosive samples. We got PETN, EARTHx, and TNT, and we showed that I don't know if I'm saying this right now because it's been a while, but the hexane rings actually were turning the quantum dots off. And so we described those effects, and that's, the crossover into quantum sensing. Now, the motivation behind it is I thought, well, you never see an astronaut who's also an astrophysicist, right? I mean, that might happen in science fiction, but generally speaking, you need to have the hands-on experimental experience. So I thought, I'm going to go with condensed matter physics, as much as that's a mouthful, and go from there and see how far I get. So if you want to know, today you might find these quantum dots inside of things like the QLED branded TVs by Samsung and LG. They were pretty optimistic 10 years ago that you could embed quantum dots in the retinas of rats and give them night vision. So, still a possibility in the future, but we'll see about that. But we're here today to talk about high seas. And I know that there's some people in the audience today that are still developing their scientific journey. They might have aspirations for being astronauts as well. So every once in a while, I'll drop a little hint about something that I did in my past that I think led me down this path. And number one is apply for everything. So the only reason I got to go on this experience is because I got really good at filling out forms. And even today, I have to fill out forms. In fact, today I'd say I'm worse at filling out forms in terms of the failure rate. So at KPMG, we respond to proposals a lot. I'd say about 1 in 20 proposals that we respond to ends up as a success. In this case, I only had to submit 2 applications, and I got selected for the high seas mission 2. And really, you got to motivate yourself for this. So imagine what the positive consequences are. In this case, not only did I get to pretend to be a Martian in a really cool space habitat, but I've enjoyed 11 years of being able to share this story with everybody. So this is our mission patch. This is the crew that was selected. So we had many, many rounds of selections. There were like 300 applicants, and they had to whittle it down. And it ended up being a self-selection process in the end where we said, I really like this guy, and I really like that guy, and that girl, and this guy. And the 6 of us decided, hey, we're going to be a Mars crew together. So I'll introduce from top left is Casey Stedman, experience in the military, navigator on C-130 airplanes. Annie Caraccio, at the time working at NASA, I think still working at NASA, but doing what's ostensibly waste management and understanding how we can recycle the materials that we bring into space with us into reusable and useful materials again. Ron Williams was our crew psychologist, a long history of psychology and psychotherapy, and kind of what I consider like the mole on the mission. Like it was a psychology study, but we also brought a psychologist with us, so there was a little bit of a conflict of interest on his behalf. Tiffany Swarmer on the right, top right, she works as a contractor for NASA now. I know that historically she's done things like spacesuit development, and now she's involved in actual astronaut training, so quite the compliment on the top row. And then finally, bottom left is Lucy Poulet from France, and again, doing contract work for the European Space Agency and focused on plant science and plant growth within space environments. And then there's me, the Canadian, the nerd, and my role, at least on the mission, because of my background in physics, was the communications specialist. Won't call myself an engineer because I know that that's a more loaded term here in Calgary. And we got to live on the big island of Hawaii, mainly for historical reasons. So the Apollo missions did a lot of their training in the lava fields of Hawaii, but also because like the ground is red, so it looks like Mars. And if I can laser here, I know it'll be hard for people on the stream to see, but right about where the laser dot is where you might find the habitat today. I'm not sure if it's still there, if it's blown away by hurricanes or winds or anything like that. And it's really meant to be an analog of Olympus Mons on Mars. So, you know, this is the solar system's largest mountain by many metrics. I think you can say it's the tallest, you can say it's probably the heaviest. But when we go to Mars, eventually, this is also probably one of the more interesting places because this is where the interior of the planet comes to the surface, right? And if you want to understand what's happening deep underground on Mars, much easier to go and sample layers of the volcano than to actually try and drill multiple kilometers down into the crust. And I think this is our opportunity to try out the first video. So let's have an aerial view of the high seas habitat, and you can see just how isolated the actual location is. So this is after the fact. I convinced my family to pay for a helicopter ride, and 6 of us went out and checked out what the habitat looked like from the sky. So, I mean, immediately you see that there's a chain of craters, and historically this area was a quarry that was used to build the road from the main highway between Hilo and Kona up to the Mauna Loa volcano observatory, where they have the active earthquake observatory and volcanism studies. And I think we can switch back now to the slides. So you saw that chain of craters from above. You wouldn't be surprised to find that there are these structures on all of the terrestrial planets in our own solar system. So you can go to places like Mercury, you can go to places like Mars, you can go presumably to places like Venus, although you don't have aerial photographs because of the thick cloud cover there. And of course you can find structures like this here on Earth. And you might wonder, well, it's like, okay, that's cool. Why is that interesting? Well, Earth is special. Earth has a magnetic field, and that magnetic field protects us from the solar radiation. So basically, you know, when you go out and you look up at the aurora, that's the solar system trying to kill us. Well, Mars doesn't have a strong magnetic field. In fact, many people would argue that it's randomized magnetic fields just based on what was available when it did have a molten core. But if you go to Mars, you need to protect yourself from solar radiation, and some of the best opportunities to do that is to go and find one of these holes in the ground and just live in the hole and have the benefit of multiple layers of rock above you. So, I mean, obviously these aren't all straight down, but the ones in the picture sure look like it. You'll also have structures like lava tubes that we'll discuss a little later on. So here's the ground view, the corresponding ground view of that. And of course, this is on Earth, right? We're not talking about real Mars, we're talking about fake Mars, but through doing all these talks, basically what I've come to think is like this really is kind of the closest that we'll get to the environment on Mars. And I might have some complaints about how the habitat was constructed. I might have had some expectations of more Hollywood-like space enclosures with cool cabinets and different lighting. And we ended up going there and it's kind of an IKEA habitat. Let's just put it that way. But there's a kind of banana for scale. There's the crew. And of course, the rule is if you go outside, you need to be wearing a spacesuit. And so you'll see in the videos in a couple of places that the cool spacesuits are the MXCs that you see, the white spacesuits. And those were actually developed at the University of Maryland to simulate not only like the pressure that you'd feel on your legs and arms and body from the pressurization of a real spacesuit, but kind of what the weight would feel like if you were actually in the lower Martian gravity as well. And then because they only made 2 of those, we had to get like off-the-shelf hazmat suits and pretend that those were real-life spacesuits as well. So a lot of pretending happening going on here, but it's all in the spirit of being a real astronaut on Mars. So I'm going to take a break for 10 minutes, and I'm going to let past me walk you through the interior of the dome, and I might pause in a couple of places, but I spent 2 hours on the bus ride down from Edmonton making the captions, so most of what I want to say is in the captions and or in the narration. So let's roll it. One of our last EVAs is a preparation for the eventuality of a solar storm on Mars. So we're packing a bunch of emergency rations and we're going outside today to stash them in a known secure location near the hab. Tiffany's suiting up. She's going to be carrying one of the backpacks, as is Casey. And I myself will be playing Capcom for them. Okay, you guys, give me a wave and an okay if you're ready to go. Good. Alright, I'm going to start the countdown. And you guys have a safe trip out there. And I'll see you when you get back. This is the super high-tech airlock. So while the rest of the crew is out on EVA, I get to have the entire habitat to myself. Now this is my bedroom. So as you can see, I've decorated my walls with pictures from home. This is my bed. Some more pictures. This is my desk, but of course my laptop is downstairs doing the 3D print. And that's the extent of it. It's quite small. So this is upstairs. You can see the other bedrooms of the other crew. We've got 6 bedrooms up here and 1 bathroom. And this is the bathroom. The toilet looks a little strange because it's a composting toilet. So the way it works is we deposit our waste into a drum along with some sawdust, and there's a crank to turn it every 2 days, and our waste is composted into soil that we could conceivably use as fertilizer for plants, but on this mission in particular we're not doing that. And there was a toilet disaster you can ask me about. Okay, so we're upstairs in the dome. You can see down below is kind of the common area where we have a couch, some workstations, the 3D printer, and also the treadmill. And I'm going to take you down. Careful not to fall down. I'll show you the lab. There's no hospital. So this is one of the plant experiments. It's an Orbitech plant growth chamber. And if you look very carefully, you can see that we've got some tomatoes growing. We've already harvested several tomatoes, peas, and radishes. This is the science lab, and there's some more plant growth experiments in here. This is a home-built watering chamber, and here is some of the lettuce that Lucy's growing for her experiments. Okay, so this is the lab. Of course, down here we have a second bathroom for 3 of the other crewmates. The upstairs bathroom is only for 3. Here's our exercise equipment. And this is the kitchen area. And you'll notice that there's a window here. This is the only window in the habitat, so unless we're actually out on a spacewalk, this is the view that we get. And it's kind of nice. It's all red rocky lava flows down into the valley. And across the valley we can see Mauna Loa with the observatories on top. Not a lot of plant life or animal life to be seen here though. It's very quiet.
Lots of spiders.
Now this is our kitchen. The kitchen is basically just this workstation here with a sink on this side. And you'll notice that we don't have a stove. What we use instead are these induction plates. So we have these induction plates that we can haul out. And all of the pots and pans are induction pots and pans, so we can use those. We have some dry storage on this side, and if you look over on this side, this is our dehydrated food storage. So you can see our green beans, lots of those, celery, sliced carrots, tomatoes, potatoes, cauliflower, everything that you could want. The food tastes rather good, although the consistency is something to be desired, as it's more of a mush. Now through this door is kind of our utility area in the back. And down this right-hand hallway we have a laundry with a high efficiency washing machine and an electric dryer, although we tend to use drying racks instead of the electric dryer to conserve power. On the other side we have what we call the telemetry room. And this is mostly off access, but this is where our communications from the outside world come in. So we have a bunch of network switches at the top, and they're all connected to sensors in the habitat. Each one of these boxes is connected to temperature sensors and fan controllers around the habitat. So we can actually read that off of a control panel that we call UWELA. So you can see exactly how much power our batteries are storing. They're at 69% charge. You can see how much water we have. We're at 86% capacity. And you can read things like the temperature inside the habitat. And if I click on these numbers, they actually bring up charts that tell us the last 24 hours of activity. So you can see during the night it got cool enough to run our thermostat so that we didn't drop below 60 degrees Fahrenheit. And that's the majority of the dome. On the other end of the dome we have the shipping container, which has more storage area and a workshop. And if you'd like to see that, we will have to just go back through the zipper door here. Now the crew is out on EVA, but I've waited the 5 minutes for this section to repressurize, so now I can go in. And this is the shipping container area. So this is the door that leads out of the habitat. And this is the shipping container here. Inside we have the controllers for our solar panels and the batteries that keep us alive at night. So you can see we've got lots of storage in this area, a workbench with all the tools that we need to make repairs. And these are our solar panel controllers. So these are actually taking power from the solar panels right now. And this indicator means that we're charging the habitat. We're actually generating 7.8 kilowatts at the moment, and the habitat is only using 1.2. So that 6.6 excess kilowatts is being used to charge these batteries. And these battery banks are what keep us running during the night. So we have capacity in each bank for 10 kilowatt hours. And right now we're charging with 70%. Now the rest of this is our AC distribution system, and inside this box is our water pump. So ultimately, we have a very self-sufficient hab up here that runs almost entirely on solar power. go ahead to flip to just the next one, and I'll talk over this next video. There's a couple of things I wish I had included in that, but not that one. The time lapse. Spoiler alert. So this is the view out the window. I just set my camera up for several hours here to take a view of what the actual view might look like on any given day. We did get the occasional rainstorm, and early in March we actually got a snowstorm as well. So the altitude here, I mean, it does look pretty flat, but we're at about 10,000 feet altitude, and it extends up to 14,000 feet for the top of Mauna Loa, to give you an idea of where on that we are. But sorry, bear with us. But the mountain Mauna Loa is just so big that it looks flat from just about everywhere that you are. The other thing I wanted to mention too is, like, we were basically allocated 1 minute of shower time per day. And that translated into a 2-minute shower every second day. And because of the way the water is heated with a solar water heater, that first minute of flowing water to the shower was always cold. So we would capture that in the first minute, reuse that as our dishwater for later in the evening, and then all 6 of us would line up basically to have 2 minutes after 2 minutes after 2 minutes of continuously warm showers. Am I back on the deck here? All right, so then we have a picture of Ron, and you'll notice maybe in that video that Ron wasn't in the video. So what happened to Ron? Well, we simulated his death. Because of the altitude and because of, some physiological symptoms, Ron suffered from altitude sickness, and it affects everybody differently. And in Ron, it manifested as severe nighttime sleep apnea, which meant that he didn't have an opportunity to recharge at night. So he just had diminishing energy over the first 3 weeks of our mission. And on, I think, day 21 or 24, he called it quits and said, I'm going to go and hang out in Hawaii, or in Hilo, and I'll see you guys after the mission. And he might have snuck us a couple of packs of Doritos and a bottle of vodka, but I'm not supposed to admit those things. So that was Ron's kind of last portrait, gazing out the window at the view we had. Before High Seas 2, the High Seas Mission 1 was a food study. So we got all the benefits and knowledge transfer from a 4-month mission, where they basically said, based on all these freeze-dried and dehydrated ingredients, what are the good recipes? So we basically got a cheat sheet for food. And this is about, call it 3 months worth of food, and we were there for 4 months. So we did get a resupply of some of the items that were perishable without refrigeration over longer than a 2-month time period. So, like, think about your tortillas that you can get off the shelf at Safeway. Like, those actually stay good pretty long, like 2 months without refrigeration. But it was nice to have kind of a resupply at the midpoint, because Ron ate all the peanut butter and Nutella as well. All right. We did grow plants. They were probably the highlight when it came to food, was eating the tomatoes and the radishes that we grew ourselves. And about once a month, we had enough lettuce for everyone to share a salad. So there were particular meals I can remember. I mean, Tiffany, one of the meals she made was like, a hamburger. And she baked the buns, and she made patties out of the dehydrated hamburger meat, and we had fresh lettuce on them and tiny sliced cherry tomatoes. And the rest of the time, I mean, it doesn't look super appetizing, but that is basically bruschetta, right? And like I said, it tasted good, but it didn't feel great in your mouth all the time. So at the end, I was like, they're like, well, your first day out, what do you want for breakfast? And they're like, yogurt, fruit. And I'm like, ribs and French fries. And I forced them to make French fries at 4 a.m. All right, so we're going to queue up another video. This is going to walk us through some of the exterior kind of aspects. And again, apologies to anybody that you'll benefit from the captions here. That's all I need to say.
So you heated up here. collapsed. You open the door and you step outside. Okay, so the 5-minute countdown is over. We're going to open the door and we're going to step outside. Follow me. It's a beautiful day on Mauna Loa. You can see Mauna Loa off in the distance there. All right, and this is our little neck of the woods. Nothing but red ground and lava flows. So we're on top of the cinder cone here, and as you can see behind me, Commander Stedman is taking some geological samples. And we've had to characterize just about everything about this feature up here. So if I continue turning around, you'll be able to see Annie and the hazmat suit behind me. And if you look on further, you can see the dome and Mauna Loa off in the distance. Now, we're about 8,000 feet on Mauna Loa. So if you look off in that direction over here, you can actually see the top of Mauna Loa. It's at 12,000 feet, and from here it doesn't look like there's much elevation change at all. But between where we're standing and that ridge that you see way off in the distance, there's about 4,000 feet difference. From this vantage point, you should be able to see the dome behind me and the solar array that we use to generate power. The solar array consists of 36 solar panels, each capable of generating several hundred watts during full sunlight, and a fraction of that when it's cloudy out. This supplies us with several kilowatt hours per day that let us run out all the systems inside the habitat, and they also charge the battery bank inside the sea can that you see that lets us continue running all of our systems at night. So here's the south-facing side of the dome, and on top of the shipping container, we've got our solar water heater, which is these black panels and that shiny middle bit that you see. The solar water heater is capable of heating water well above the boiling point, but it's currently set to about 50 degrees Celsius, which gives us a pretty warm shower once that hot water is flowing. This is our water reserve out here for drinking water, shower water, and just general purpose water. And as you can see, they're about 500 gallons each. Now, one thing to notice when we're out here is that we have a sensor on the top of one of the tanks that actually measures the hold of water in both. But the entire habitat is wired with these sensors that let us know how all of the systems are behaving.
You can see in the pictures here too, the camouflage cover that's on the habitat. So the press photos all show the habitat, without that camouflage cover. But in order to stop enticing people from driving up from the saddle highway, they would actually camouflage the side of the dome that was facing down the mountainside. So where are we? Now we should be on the next lesson slide. So for all you grade 6s and in the crowd here, basically, this slide is measure your success and recognize your growth over time. And I think a lot of people in academia suffer from what's called imposter syndrome. And it's the belief that you aren't as good as what you think you are, that the knowledge you've gained is somehow fake or false or whatever. And I struggle with this a little bit myself, especially transitioning from an academic PhD position and going and doing more industry and business type work. But when you reflect on it, you should recognize that you do grow over time, and you can point to things in the past that you've done that should make you feel good and should make you feel proud, even if it's graduating from grade 7 or getting, doing a marathon or getting out of bed some days. It should be a mark of pride. And in this photo, there is kind of a measurement tool here that's kind of cool. This is the SwampWorks GeoTool that Annie is holding, overlooking this cool lava flow. And that SwampWorks GeoTool is actually, not this one in particular, but tools like it were developed for the Apollo missions in order to measure the shear forces in the soil. So you can basically put the end of the stick into the ground, twist the knob on top, and then at a certain torque, the fork in the ground would shear, and you would be able to say, oh, that has a shear force of 10 Newton meters or whatever, so this is loose soil or this is tight soil. But we went out and about quite a bit. I mean, over 120 days, 20 excursions might not sound like much, but wearing the suits and walking for multiple kilometers was actually quite difficult. And I remember several times, in fact, one time in particular, I was wearing one of the MXC suits, so right away I'm feeling all the pressure and all the restrictions. And we had a cooling loop that we wore in a vest that we would put ice water in the back to pump around the cooling loop, so you'd be cooled by this. And we were out for long enough that the ice all melted, and it basically just became a warm water loop that started heating up my body. By the end of like the 2-hour hike, I was experiencing heat stroke, and for basically 2 days after the fact, I was out of commission. But we'd go out and we'd find these structures. I mean, we had a discussion earlier today in the department where it's like, what kind of lava did we see out there? And in the background, you see this very rough-looking lava. That's the type lava. In Hawaiian language, is like the sound that you make if you try and walk over it, because it's extremely sharp. It'll just tear through the bottom of your shoes. And the smoother lava, this is the pahoehoe flow. So this is like when you see a liquid lava flow, that's the pahoehoe. And as a pahoehoe flow cools, it'll cool first from the surface and encrust the surface. And in a lot of cases, the liquid lava will drain out from under the encrusted surface and leave behind a lava tube. So here's an example of a small lava tube, but here's an example of a big lava tube. So this is what I was saying, like, if I'm gonna go to Mars, this is what I'm gonna look for, and this is where I'm gonna build my habitat. I think in this case, I would just find a big canvas balloon and pressurize it inside there and try and take up as much space as I can with just like a big canvas balloon. And we also had some other interesting things. So everybody had a project. I keep mentioning Lucy's plant growth experiments. I keep mentioning Annie's waste management experiments. Casey was more on the sample collection and mapping, so he has some very nice drawings that he did of the sites around it. And I brought with me some surgical tools, stainless steel surgical tools, and their 3D printed counterparts. So every week we basically have a time trial who can do a suture in the fastest time using the stainless steel versus the 3D printed. So this was kind of early days in 3D printing, and in a lot of cases, you'd end up with like a broken 3D printed tool. But the nice thing is that you can print another one, right? And if you break a stainless steel tool, then you don't have it. But what was kind of an interesting result of this is that, yes, you can perform surgery with 3D printed tools just about as well. And again, not something that I always bring up, but it's something that's really interesting, is at one point, Lucy was trying to open a sausage. And she did the thing that they tell you not to do. She cut towards herself instead of away from herself. And she had a small laceration just below her wrist. And we had to get a robot doctor to come and visit us. And he had forgotten how to do sutures. So all 5 of us at the time were basically like, well, we'll practice in this. We'll just tell you how to do it. And we helped Lucy get stitches for that particular incident. And you know, the mission was fraught with all kinds of things that went bad. We ran out of water at one point. We ran out of a network at one point. We couldn't communicate. And all our emails are delayed by 20 minutes. So if you imagine, like, tech support really doesn't exist on Mars, but you know, just being able to email mission control and say, hey, we're having trouble with our network, that email will take 20 minutes outbound and 20 minutes inbound, so a 40-minute just to say, so there's a problem. So this is just an example on that MacBook that's in the telemetry room that they would be able to peek into using a VNC or whatever those things are called now. Let Bill know that we're having problems. Bill was our IT guy. He was great. All right, here's a graph of the water. And I mentioned that the sensor was on top of the water cylinders because we ran out of water, that they had miscalibrated how the sensors read them. And so it's a great undergraduate physics problem to say, like, if the only measurement you have is from the top of a 500-gallon cylinder to the surface of the water, write an equation that describes how much water is left based on the distance that the sensor measures. So when we do undergraduate talks, that's a fun problem. But at the time, this book by Andy Weir had just come out called The Martian, and I was reading it, and I was like, fortuitously, I read this passage one day where Mark Watney is repairing electronics on one of the rovers, and excuse the language, but if you've ever tried to do electronics in a space, you'll know that it's a pain in the ass. And the next day, I had to go out and repair one of the sensors for the water wearing a spacesuit. And I could tell you that it took quite a long time to be able to put 6 different wires in the right order wearing, I mean, what amounted to garden gloves. So you can practice that at home. Oh, I do talk about this. There's Lucy's surgery right there. So lesson number 1, knife away. Lesson number 2, sausage packages have a pull here tab. All right, so I know you really want the sausage, Lucy, but take your time. And I went into this experience as a PhD student in physics. Obviously, I have white skin, so there's a certain amount of privilege that comes with the experience that I had leading up to that point. And I can say that from like a psychological standpoint, I had all the bravado and machismo that you'd expect from someone who's 29 years old in that situation, being selected to simulate a Mars mission, right? And about halfway through the mission, I was like, I feel lonely. I also feel very close to these 4 other people who are literally feet away from me on either side anytime I try and go to sleep, and anytime I try and cook, and anytime I have a shower, and anytime I go outside, they're always here. And so there was a big dichotomy of emotions that you experience. It's the loneliest you ever feel, but it's also the closest you've ever been trapped inside of this experiment with 5 or 6 other people. So the lesson here is practice emotional regulation, whether that's through meditation or whether that's through therapy. I think that it's important that everybody has some way of recognizing that we're all squishy human beings and we all experience emotions. And those things that we feel have an impact on the people around us. So make a note of that, put it in your back pocket, and keep it. Now, the other thing that I learned is you need to have fun. So this is April 1st, 2014. This is the image that we uploaded, an obvious fake, right? But at first glance, when you only get a thumbnail in your email, you might think there's a lava flow outside of the habitat. So I played this joke on Mission Control. May the 4th be with you. We dressed up as our favorite characters. That was pretty good cosplay for the materials that we had available. And I insisted that we buy pool noodles, not because I foresaw this, but because I thought, you need to have pool noodles on a space mission. Like, they'll just come in handy, right? May long weekend. Oh, sorry, I skipped ahead one slide there. But so I had my family all send me letters to Mars before I left, and then I scheduled them throughout the mission so that I could open them. This just happened to be a set of Lego that my friend Mark Julian sent me, and there was one calendar invite, and it said kittens. And I was like, what? Why did I put kittens in my calendar? And it took me a long time to figure it out, but someone had sealed an envelope with a kitten sticker. And so I had a mystery for a long time before I figured out that it was meant to remind me to open that envelope. May long weekend, we went camping and made a blanket fort. And we actually hiked 5 kilometers on the treadmill with all of our camping gear in order to simulate an actual camping excursion. Our fireplace was made of an orange soap container with flashlights. And we had goodies like hot dogs and whatever these granola thingies were at the time. So again, these things kept us sane. I know I shared some saucier stories to the people I went out for lunch with, but lots of really good times were had. And despite the fact that this was a psychology experiment, I actually really liked the people that we were with. The one thing that was really infuriating was one of the psychology tests that we had to do was a video game disguised, or rather, it's a psychology test disguised as a video game. And I won't go into detail here, but you know how some board games can make and break a friendship? Well, that video game broke us on a weekly basis. This is a great photo on Canada Day that I got to take. And I know it's like you're waving a Canadian flag in Hawaii, and there's a bit of a conflict there, but I really wanted Chris Hadfield to tweet this out. And I eventually got in touch with his son, I think it was Ethan, that was managing his Twitter account. And they agreed to tweet out, not this picture, but one where I'm reading his Astronaut's Guide to Life on Earth wearing a spacesuit, just kind of sitting in that position there. And they didn't tag me in it. They were just like, check out this cool dude that went on and I was like, I need the followers, like, bro. So the sun now sets on the Mars habitat. This is a time lapse, so we can flip over to that and kind of just wrap up. You might ask yourself, like, what's the lesson to learn here? And I kind of struggle 11 years after the fact to come up with a really good lesson for you to take home. A lot has changed in 11 years. I know I was more optimistic about the idea of colonizing Mars 11 years ago. I thought, hey, in 10 years, the technology is going to be there that we can start to have these small, crude missions to at least the orbit of the moon, maybe to the distance of Mars. Spoiler alert! That's bonus content. But I think ultimately, like, if I'm going to point my finger at any one thing, the more I think about it is that it was the food that was really important, not just for nutrition, but also from a mental health perspective. So I'm sharing with you a picture of my sister. She works at Kelowna Land and Orchard School, KLO School in Kelowna. And they have this really cool program for their students where they have a shipping container equipped with artificial lighting on the interior. So it's not sunlight that filters in here, but it's all electric lighting. And I promise to say this. They're sponsored by President's Choice Children's Charity and the Powerful Kids Future Growers program. So many thanks to the people that donated the infrastructure for my sister to be able to do this. But through this program, kids learn how to grow plants in an artificial environment. And as a result, they are actually able to provide something like 70 families with like food kits that provide them with fresh lettuce and potatoes and some of the other things that I mentioned earlier. But the more I think about it, the more I think like this is actually, it has bigger impacts. And I'm not an expert when it comes to food sovereignty and food security. But I will tell you that, the difference between a student struggling to get a B and someone succeeding in having an A is sometimes just the food they eat, or it's sometimes just the quality of sleep that they get. It has nothing to do with how hard they study. So everybody on planet Earth, and I think everybody in Canada, should have access to this. We don't need to beg billionaires to donate money to be able to have this kind of food security. This is the kind of thing that if you're interested in it, the money's out there, the motivation is out there, and the interest is out there to build this in your own communities. So go out and grow some lettuce. That's the real lesson, is go out and grow some lettuce. I'll put my lessons up here, and this is basically the time now where I would normally stop. But you saw a sneaky peek of my bonus content. So we're going to come back to the question slide in a little bit. And I want to just take the next 10 minutes to share with you the other things that I did to try and become an astronaut, because I think it's important. In 2016, I did apply to the Canadian Space Agency's astronaut recruitment, and I got to roughly 160th out of the 3,000 to 6,000 candidates that they normally take in. So that's pretty good, I would say. More importantly, I got to do cool stuff outside of high seas. And this will just be video after video. So go ahead and roll the aerobatic airplane video. And I'll maybe take the volume down if it's possible, as I'll talk over this. I basically do a hand signal here just saying what I'm about to do. We're going to do a 4G upward loop-the-loop. And this was kind of another medical study, but mostly I actually paid. But this is in Daytona, Florida at the Embry-Riddle Flight School. And I did have a blood pressure monitor that we were monitoring my blood pressure during different aerobatic maneuvers. But in this one, I didn't have to activate the blood pressure monitor. It's mainly just a fun way to feel the 4G weight of that centripetal acceleration. But there's also a bit of a parabolic loop or parabolic exit from the loop. So I get a tiny bit of microgravity here that you can see through me throwing this blood pressure monitor around. Again, and the advice in the lesson here is I wouldn't actually go out and pay for these things. They cost a lot of money, but really the volunteer experience with high seas was great. Let's just keep rolling this one. This was a spacecraft egress and survival systems experience where we basically got to go on one of these helicopter dunkers, and I'm going to emerge here momentarily from the back corner. That was like to simulate what would happen if you were in a space capsule and you got dropped in the ocean, how you would get out. The interesting thing here is actually the guy in the background right there. He paid the same amount of money for me as me, but he could not stand being inverted in the water. So he wasn't allowed to go in the helicopter body. And I was like, well, why did you pay? Why did you sign up if you knew that you were afraid of going upside down in the water? That was fun too. It's hard to capture in a clip, but we redid that several times. And my favorite was they have these can you even see them? They had hoses up at the top, but they could simulate like a torrential typhoon downpour and flashing lights for lightning. And we had to kind of escape from this helicopter body in that. Back in Ottawa, I signed up with, again, the same crew, but testing these spacesuits. And again, I'm paying for this, so it wasn't the wisest budgetary choice. But here are kind of more extended microgravity experiences in the Falcon 20, if I'm not mistaken. Maybe the number's wrong. And I noticed that I also said the wrong altitudes. So go with the ones that the video Ross said, 8,000 feet and 4,000 higher, whatever it is. But yeah, this is not the NASA vomit comet. There's very little room inside the Falcon 20. And needless to say, after this flight, and not on the video, I barfed. And I think I got one more. Yeah, the good one. And this, again, now I'll say this again, I didn't pay for the next one. So it makes it that much more valuable. This was, again, a medical volunteer, medical volunteer study on the effects of meditation on high gravity situations. So this is at the NASTAR facility outside of Philadelphia. And this is a mining motor embedded in the ground with a giant arm and basically a virtual reality spaceship on the end. But they program these rocket profiles, and they can actually spin you up to like real rocket G-forces. So this is a simulated launch at 4 Gs, and the number to keep in mind here is the max GR. That's what I'm experiencing. And they taught us how to do, I think they called it the hook maneuver, but I could be mistaken about what it is. It looks painful, but you're basically just breathing in quickly and keeping your legs pressurized and your buttocks pressurized to make sure that the blood continues to flow to your head. And if you don't do that, and something that I did experience is that you will have a narrowing of your vision and you'll eventually lose consciousness. But what's interesting about this is that 4.4 Gs is not a whole heck of a lot. Like, I think most people in here would find that maybe a little bit uncomfortable, but they programmed in the reentry profile. And what most people don't realize is that when you're coming flying into Earth's atmosphere on a spaceship, you slam into the atmosphere, and the braking action is actually more G-forces in some cases than what it took to get you out of the atmosphere. So you'll see here that max GR actually goes way above 4.4 and up to about 6 Gs. So that's, I'm basically 1,000 pounds right now. That's how heavy I am. And, a 10-pound arm becomes 60 pounds to be able to push buttons on the console if you have to do that. But I describe it as being smothered by an elephant is how it felt. So that does bring me to the end of the talk. And what I'll do is I'll put the QR codes up for my website with, I haven't updated this since 2016. So I do have like a log of high seas. I do have some of the other experiences that I did. And I do intend to kind of maybe try and revive this sometime in the future. But also my sister's modular farm and a link to the Canadian National School food policy and how food security impacts things like grades and health. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ross. That was amazing. Who knew real life on fake Mars could be so amazingly cool? Please, sorry. Please, if you have questions for us, you have two options here. We're going to have somebody roving around with a microphone in the room, Melody here. And then also, if you're online, please text your questions to our team at 403-708-5749. Yeah, again, if you're here in person, you can just hold up your hand and we'll bring it to you. Looks like we already got questions down front.
Hi. Hi there.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. So how many, to get all that stuff on Mars, how many rockets would NASA have to deploy to get that much? Because that's a lot of stuff, right?
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't have an exact answer, but in my mind, the habitat that we habitated would have been just a single rocket, and the actual infrastructure of the rocket body would have been reused as part of that. So like the shipping container, for example, you can imagine if you land your rocket on Mars and then tip it over, you could actually have, seal the ends and put all your infrastructure in there, and then just have the inflatable bubble as the other component. But when you're really talking about colonizing Mars, like radiation protection is going to be probably the most important and the heaviest aspect of that. So unless you're building underground, the water that you bring is probably going to be the heaviest component, especially I've heard proposals about building habitat bubbles where a layer of water is used and the water storage is actually like the walls of the habitat, or building ice blocks around the outside of it as well for radiation protection. So if you intend to bring all of that stuff with you, then you're talking about at least one, more likely 2, 3, 4, and really, if you look at, for example, the SpaceX proposals to get the super heavy rockets to Mars, you're sending one rocket to Mars, but before it leaves, you're launching 3 or 4 just to get enough fuel into low Earth orbit to then transfer to the Mars transfer rocket. So, it's not really feasible to say that just one rocket is going to be able to do the job, but probably more likely a dozen. And you don't even talk, we only did a 4-month mission and simulated the surface mission. It's a year to get there on good timing, and it's a year to get back as well. So thinking about the infrastructure needed to support life, not just for the 4 months on the surface, but for the 2 years that you're going to be spending to get out there.
Okay, thanks. And then just one more question. Did you ever just go, what am I doing here? Why am I on the top of this volcano? This is just crazy. I just want to walk out the door and go home. Did you did you just ever lose it?
Me personally, no. But there was the closest that I ever experienced to that was on the last night. So we wrote in our journals, we did our last psychology surveys. We had nothing left to do in order to fulfill the objectives of the scientific part of the study, except wait for them to come and open the door. And me and Casey snuck outside without spacesuits on. And we were like, we're getting away with it. But the view from that altitude, we had not seen the stars outside of the actual acrylic windows and bubbles for the spacesuits. And we were just like, holy Moses. It was amazing up there. So that's the one thing that, kind of is the opposite of being stir crazy, but being stir astonished.
Yeah, a question in from online here. Why was there only one window in the hab? Was there a reason for that in terms of the design or the simulation?
Now, if you were looking carefully when I panned across the science lab, you would have seen a circular cutout that was filled in with fabric. So it was possible to have 2 windows there. But I believe the company that supplied the actual dome is more along the lines of supplying them for like conferences where you would have half of the dome open and put like a Ferrari or a Bentley or something inside of it. So it wasn't really something fit for purpose. And I think the window is more of an afterthought than anything else. But I do see like on Airbnb now that there's a lot of these like geodesic dome destinations that have the fabric thing, and all fully one half of the dome is like the transparent acrylic fabric. That would have been way cooler. Yeah. Where you're getting it.
Hi, so I'm Shaliza, and I was just wondering, first of all, thank you so much. I really enjoyed the entire presentation. But I was also wondering, so is there any chance there could be microbial life in Mars? And if so, how would it survive all that radiation, and how would it affect its evolution to be?
All right, you're treading into territory where I'm totally willing to be wrong in the answer that I give. Mm-hmm. And I'm looking to the EEE department to correct me if I am wrong. But if you look way back about 1 billion years ago, not only did Mars have liquid oceans, or at least we think it had liquid oceans at the time, but presumably there was also a time in its history where it had molten magma core as well. So if you do have a molten magma core with convection currents, then you would generate a magnetic field that would protect the surface from solar radiation. So 1 billion years ago, Mars was probably a lot more Earth-like than what it is today. And I know, and I'm not up to date on the theories and on the actual science, but I know at some point I've read something about the proposal that there were times in the solar history where material from meteorite impacts on Earth would have been ejected and may have transferred into the Mars orbit. So perhaps something like cross-pollination between Earth and Mars. Do not quote me on that one to anyone scientific, right? Those are theories that are way out there, and I think, I would love to who is it today that said there were dinosaurs on Mars? Right? We were in one of the labs. Annie, where are you? What? She didn't say there were dinosaurs on Mars, but we were in a lab where there were 3D prints of Mars and dinosaurs, and I was like, wouldn't it be cool, right? So, okay, we got another question over there. One here first. Oh, all right, in the toque then.
Okay, sorry. The two quick questions. One is I'm very fascinated with the weight of water, and the fact that you're bringing a certain amount, and that someone couldn't figure out how much you actually had, so you'd had to have more. On a trip like that, I assume there'd be a lot more water recycling. Were you doing anything like that?
We did capture all of the wastewater that we generated. Obviously, like the composting toilets were designed to have evaporative moisture relief, so we couldn't capture the moisture that was in the waste in the toilets. But like the dirty dishwater, the shower water, those were all captured in gray water tanks. And there were no real technologies. Obviously, like the infrastructure there lives and dies by how much money can be invested in it, or if you get sponsor companies. So, it kind of boiled down to who built the infrastructure, how much money was available, what technologies did they choose to demo while they were up there. So it doesn't really come up here, but NASA won't fund an infrastructure build. They'll lease existing infrastructure for something like this. And if you've seen the movie Tetris, the main character, this is the Apple movie that came out recently. The main character is Hank Rogers, famous for going behind the Iron Curtain and licensing the source code for Tetris from the Soviet developer at the time to Nintendo. And so Hank Rogers plays a critical role in High Seas because all that money he earned licensing Tetris and bundling it with the Game Boy, he used to get rich, buy a ranch in Hawaii, and eventually set up an energy lab where they've got solar hydrogen generation. And Hank was approached by the principal investigator that said, like, hey, I can get NASA funding to do a psychology study, but they won't build this habitat. Will you please build basically what you saw here. And so you can thank Tetris for building the infrastructure on Mauna Loa.
Well, and you mentioned it in your answer here, but you said you were going to tell us about the disaster with the toilet.
Oh yeah, well, let's just say that the heaters in the toilets needed to maintain a certain temperature in order for the bacteria to decompose the waste. And one of the toilets didn't reach that critical threshold for a period of several weeks. We didn't notice that the heater wasn't working. So you basically had uncomposted waste accumulating, and you do have to slide the tray out and empty it on occasion, but you hope that it's compost at that stage, and it was not. So there was a big effort to remove that waste in a sanitary way, and it was very difficult and very heavy. Basically a giant Rubbermaid full of uncomposted sawdust and waste.
Another question in here from online, just as we're waiting. I believe this one is from your sister. It says, great presentation, brother. Thank you for the shout out, and also happy belated birthday. The question is, how do you think your mental health would have been improved or changed had Ron been able to stay in the habitat?
Ron was a great source of psychological stability, and he still is. Like, I will occasionally call him up and share a little more than what I would normally share with a friend or a family member. And to this day, like, his experience has been, his experience and his advice has been instrumental in guiding me through some difficult times. So it's a tough question because he also ate all of the peanut butter and Nutella. And so I wanted to murder him. But at the same time, it kind of balances out. So, it was a tough choice. And at the time, we did have backup crew that we were like, do we want to engage another person to replace Ron for the remaining 3 months? Or are we going to pretend that he died? And we struggled a lot with this. And I actually, I hope that seventh crew member isn't out there watching the live stream right now, because I regret not inviting them to come. I think the more people that you do invite in a situation like this, the diversity that you bring with you really helps with the psychological health of the whole crew. And if I were to say, like, I don't think that 6 people can survive a 2-year journey and the surface stay on Mars, I think now, today, I would push more towards the larger colonization initiatives and say, let's not do 6 people until we can have the infrastructure for 100 to go together. And then we guarantee that, if one person goes crazy, that it's not 5 people trying to manage the situation, that it's more like 99 people trying to manage the situation.
Wonderful. I think we have time for one more question. Two, I suppose. There's 2 microphones.
Can you? Okay. Yeah. I have a question regarding when colonization in Mars become more commercial, like the transportation for the colonization, those half spheres things that you will put people there, and then the nature of information connection with Earth. So the question is how you will transport materials and colonizations, things that you will build there, and how the communication will be. Because now when we are communicating with the space stations, we have satellites in the middle, but when you are regarding Mars, at least the signal need 3-4 seconds. This is in case it is photonic, but if it is like the ones that we have, there's a lot of delay.
Yeah,
for the best.
Of course. And it's hard to simulate when you're on Earth, what it would take to, for example, visit the CBC website and load the news of the day, right? So I don't talk about it too much, but I have a lot of cool stories about what the Johnson Space Center tried to do in order to simulate the Earth to Mars communication delay. And they said, let's make it easy on ourselves. Let's assume that Earth and Mars are on opposite sides of the solar system for the entire duration of the 4-month mission. So that wouldn't be true. But they said it'll take 20 light minutes or the distance is 20 light minutes across the Earth to Mars orbital distance. So we'll simulate if they send an email, that 20 minutes later it arrives at Earth, and if they send one back, it takes 20 minutes to come back. And they tried to do all kinds of tricks and hacks and have DNS things that would redirect our things or to a countdown timer. But I was like, the reality is that if I'm browsing the Martian internet, I don't get a delay page that says I can't see this for 20 minutes. There's going to be pre-caching software. There's going to be the deep space network that's always sending that information to us. And then the website will be available. It's just that it'll have information that's 20 minutes out of date. If I go on Facebook, I'll have the whole feed from my friend list, but the last message that I see will be 20 minutes from the time that it was posted. And when you think about it, it kind of gets weird because we're right at the edge of relativity and trying to say like what's actually happening simultaneously now. Like if I'm looking at my feed and I see something that's posted now, is it happening now or was it 20 minutes ago? And how do I think about that? And what kind of things can you do? So there are some nuances there, but like my big thing is I wanted to watch Game of Thrones. It was like season 1 or season 2 that was coming out. And so I had my man on the outside download the show for us and put it in a Dropbox folder. And that's kind of closer to what I would expect would actually happen, is that you would have a local network on Mars with local storage and local infrastructure and an intranet and your homepage and your Mars, calendar and your Mars LLM or Google or whatever, the technology of the day is going to be, and that there is going to be a disconnect, right? More to your point on the actual infrastructure, there's going to have to be a reason to go to Mars to make it commercially viable, right? Discovering Mars spice, whatever the dune thing is, a real reason to go there. And I mean, in some sense, that human drive to explore, that might be motivation enough for enough people. I mean, the Mars One program showed us that the desire to go is out there in thousands of people across the planet. But when it comes down to dollars and cents to send people there, that's when we'll really have to figure out, does it make sense to go? So I know that you had a much longer question, and I know that I can't answer all of it in the time that we have allotted, but we have one more, right? So you can come talk to me after.
All right, and so I'm curious, and I've thought about this question too much, so it's been rehashed, and you might not actually have an answer to it, but you've sort of alluded to it, right? Space is cool, Mars is cool, going out, colonizing, cool, right? But you need the infrastructure, and there was a lot of pretending on this mission of what that would be like. And as you've hinted, right, everybody that seemed to be on that crew was all of a very similar shade of color, and maybe even from a similar background and resource. And so this doesn't really, and I wonder if if there are any kind of experiments or pretending that has been done to look into this 100-person infrastructure where you can take everyone, whether you're elderly, young, have a child en route, whether you end up disabled or you have an accident, how do you still function and survive and not be healthy, right?
Excellent question. Really cool question. And the answer is not going to satisfy you at all. But think about countries as spaceships, right? And think about the difference between Canada and another country, right? That we tend to embrace diversity and we tend to have a lot more interesting dynamics across the country and even the microcosms. Think about individual cities and the values that they have as spaceships, right? I think that there are a lot of lessons to be learned, and really in my mind, diversity is probably one of the most important factors for the long-term survival and stability of any space colony. I mean, you did touch on it too, why Mars in particular. And I don't personally think that Mars is a great target, or even the moon. I would love to see more thought put into self-replicating spaceships that, you send a robot out to the asteroid belt and then it just latches onto an asteroid and starts extruding a spaceship, a big 3D printed coil, and a big tube comes out one end. And then you travel there and you go, hey, there's already 100 kilometers worth of tubes here. Let's tie them all together and make one big rotating colony. And instead of going to Mars and wasting all that fuel to go down and then up and then down and then up and then down and then up, we'll just make a nice artificial farm here, learn to, get pregnant and have babies in low gravity environments or microgravity environments or even like fractional gravity environments where you say like, is it, can we do it at 0.3 Gs? Or is one feasible if we have a big enough tube? So, it's not a satisfying answer because I don't think anybody's really thought about it and gone out long enough. And in another world, in a parallel universe, I would be a science fiction author and I would write a story about colonizing the asteroid belt instead of colonizing Mars, right? But to your point, like, if we're in a spaceship right now, I think we'd be okay, right? I think there's enough people and enough diversity in this room that if you just open the door and we're on Mars, don't open the door if we're on Mars, please. I think we'd be okay, right? And I think that's, the more diversity, the better.
Wonderful. I think that was a great question to wrap up the question and answer session today. So thank you all for all of your questions, and thank you once more to Ross for being here with us today.
I'd like to just do a couple of shout outs. Annie, thank you for inviting me. Laura, Melody, and everybody else from the department here in, I can never remember it, Earth, Energy, Environment.
Triple E.
Department of Physics too, and everybody from the faculty that brought this together. Thank you very much.
Thank you.